he has time.
No, he doesn't. It's 7. Good evening. Welcome to the December 16th, 2024 City Council meeting. We request that you please silence all cell phones for the length of the meeting. And tonight's invocation and pledge will be led by Mr. Sievert. Please stand.
Stand. Lord our Father, let us counter the anxiety and frustration of this holiday season with kindness, generosity, and grace. As we look to a new year for our community, guide us to meet our challenges with resolve and our blessings with appreciation. Lord, continue to watch over our first responders, embrace those who work for our citizens, and appropriately illuminate a clear path for our community so that your will may be done. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Excuse Mr. Twist, please.
I had faith in you.
The prayer was so moving.
It was illuminating. Mrs. Knight, can you please call the roll?
Yes. Mr. Whidden?
Here.
Mrs. Marshall?
Here.
Mr. Twist?
Here.
Mrs. Snee?
Here.
Mr. Sievert?
Present.
Mr. Schilling?
Present.
Mr. Pierce?
Present.
Mrs. Westfall?
Here.
Mr. Phillips?
Move to excuse Mr. Phillips.
Second that.
Motion to excuse Mr. Phillips by Mr. Whidden, second by Mr. Pierce. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mr. Pierce?
Yes.
Mrs. Westfall?
Yes.
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips is excused.
Thank you. Mrs. Knight, will you please read December 2nd, 2024 council meeting minutes?
Minutes of Council, December 2, 2024, Committee Reports. Committee and Community and Economic Development Committee reported regarding adult use cannabis operators. Recommended that legislation be prepared amending the zoning code to permit testing laboratories as recommended by the Planning Commission. Regarding the recommendation of the Planning Commission regarding adult use cannabis operators, the majority did not support the recommendation of the Troy Planning Commission and recommended that legislation be prepared otherwise. The minority report did support the recommendation of the Planning Commission. Recreation and Parks Committee recommended that legislation be prepared, conveying to the Board of Park Commissioners in the name of the Board of Park Commissioners, all the parcels of Archer Park. Streets and Sidewalks Committee recommended that legislation be prepared, approving Troy's participation in the ODOT resurfacing program, West Main Experiment Farm Road to West Corporation Limit. Resolution number R71, 2024, consent with ODOT for the West Main Street project was given first reading and was adopted. Ordinance number 050, 2024, appropriating funds for 2025 or adoption of the budget was given second reading and adopted. Ordinance number 057, 2024, combining all parcels in Archer Park into the name of Board of Park Commissioners was given first reading and adopted. Following various comments, council adjourned at 7:23 p.m.
Motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
Motion to approve the minutes by Mr. Whidden, second by Mr. Twist. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mr. Pierce?
Yes.
Mrs. Westfall?
Yes.
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Minutes are approved.
Thank you. We'll move on to committee reports. We'll start with Building and Utilities Committee, Mr. Pierce.
Thank you, Mr. Rizzo. This committee met December 9th to consider the authorizing bidding for the roofing maintenance projects that were included in the 2025 budget. Both were budgeted in 2024, but the bid received exceeded the authorization. It was recommended that the projects be deferred to 2025 with higher authorizations. It is a recommendation of this committee that legislation be prepared authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety to advertise for bids and enter into a contract for City Hall recoding project at a cost not to exceed $125,000, and for the repairs to the coping and metal edging of the roof of the Central Service and Maintenance Facility at a cost not to exceed $180,000. Respectfully submitted by Councilman Bobby Phillips, Councilwoman Lynn Snee, and myself as chair, Samuel Pierce. Does anybody have any
Questions or comments? Got another?
This committee met December 9th regarding bidding water meters for 2025 to assure the city will have a supplier available for the meters for new construction, as well as replacement of the odor water meter radio transmitters. The prior contractor to whom a multi-year contract had been awarded is no longer the distributor for this type of meters used by the city. It is a recommendation of this committee that legislation be prepared authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety to advertise for bids and enter into a contract for 2025 supply of water meters at a cost not to exceed $1 million. Respectfully submitted by Councilman Phillips, Councilwoman Lynn Snee, and myself as chair, Samuel Pierce.
Questions? You have a third one, correct?
Yes. This committee met December 9th regarding bidding miscellaneous water meter parts for 2025. It is the recommendation of this committee that the legislation be prepared authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety to advertise for bids and enter into a contract for miscellaneous water meter parts for the calendar year 2025 at a cost not to exceed $225,400, respectfully submitted by Councilman Phillips, Councilwoman Snee, and myself as chair.
Questions? Thank you very much. Community Economic Development Committee, Mr. Schilling.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. President. This committee met to consider a request of the committee's chair that ordinances and regulations be amended at this time to require recreational trails, shared use paths to be required in all new subdivisions and developments. It was noted that the subdivision regulations are currently under review by a consultant, and that this subject will be part of that review. Committee members Snee and Pierce stated a preference to wait for the recommendation process following the submittal from the consultant. No legislative recommendations being made at this time. This is respectfully submitted by Mr. Pierce, Mrs. Snee, myself, Jeff Schilling as chair.
Any other questions? Thank you very much. Community Partnerships Committee, Mrs. Marshall.
This committee met December 9th regarding the Casstown Water Extension Project Engineering Funding Agreement. This agreement provides for the city to pay for and own the portion of the main along Staunton Road / State Route 55 between Stony Ridge Avenue and Sayers Road, thereby controlling growth and the corporate boundary in that area. It is the recommendation of this committee that legislation be prepared authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety to enter into the Village of Casstown Waterline Extension Project Funding Agreement with the Board of Miami County Commissioners and authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety to make payment for the city portion of the project to the contractor selected by the Board of Miami County Commissioners in the amount not to exceed $1.5 million. Respectfully submitted, Mr. Sievert, Mr. Twiss, and myself as chair.
Questions about the sewer line? Thank you very much. Law and Ordinance Committee, Mr. Whidden.
Thank you, Mr. President. This committee met December 9th, 2024 to consider a request for support of a D1, D2, and D3 Trex liquor permit application of the Links Golf Social LLC to be located at 240 South Walnut Street. This committee concurs that this application is an economic development project bringing over 4 new jobs to Troy. This committee recommends that a letter of support be submitted to the Director of Public Service and Safety for the D1, D2, and D3 Trex liquor permit application as requested by the Links Golf Social LLC. As this is not a matter of legislation, we ask that the following motion be approved. The Council approves the Law and Ordinance Committee report to support the Trex application of the Links Golf Social LLC to be located at 240 South Walnut Street. This is respectfully submitted by Mrs. Marshall, Mr. Twist, and myself as chair.
Move to support.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Sievert, seconded by Mr. Pierce. Mrs. Knight, could you please call the roll?
I'm sorry, I did not get who made the motions.
Mr. Sievert,
And
Mr. Pierce.
thank you. Mrs. Snee,
Yes.
Mr. Sievert,
Yes.
Mr. Schilling,
Yes.
Mr. Pierce,
Yes.
Mrs. Westfall,
Yes.
Mr. Whidden,
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall,
Yes.
Mr. Twist.
Yes.
Motion is approved.
Thank you. We'll move on to the Personnel Committee, where there's several appointments, and Mrs. Snee.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have 3 oral reports. The first of which, the Director of Public Service and Safety makes one of the 3 appointments to the Income Tax Board of Review. Mr. Titterington has requested council concurrence of the appointment of Mark Wendling to this position. The Income Tax Board of Review hears appeals of decisions of the Income Tax Administrator. I move that council concurs with the appointment of Mark Wendling to the Income Tax Board of Review for a 2-year term commencing January 1st, 2025.
Motion to approve.
Second.
That was the motion.
Huh?
I did make the motion.
Oh, okay. Second by Mr. Whidden. Roll.
Mr. Sievert,
Yes.
Mr. Schilling,
Yes.
Mr. Pierce,
Yes.
Mrs. Westfall,
Yes.
Mr. Whidden,
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall,
Yes.
Mr. Twist,
Yes.
Mrs. Snee.
Yes.
That motion is approved.
Thank you. Continue.
Certain appointments to the Community Improvement Corporation of Troy, Ohio, the CIC, are made annually. Mayor Oda has requested council concurrence of the reappointment of Bradley Bixler, Joseph Graves, Heath Murray, Kathy Vukovic, and Edward Westmeyer, and the new appointment of Ben Peppelman to fill the position formerly held by Gary Fisher. The CIC is the nonprofit development corporation established by council for the purpose of advancing, encouraging, and promoting the industrial, economic, commercial, and civic development of the community. I move that council concurs with the reappointments of Bradley Bixler, Joseph Graves, Heath Murray, Kathy Vukovic, and Edward Westmeyer, and the new appointment of Ben Peppelman to the CIC for 1-year terms commencing January 1st, 2025.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Schilling. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Schilling,
Yes.
Mr. Pierce,
Yes.
Mrs. Westfall,
Yes.
Mr. Whidden,
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall,
Yes.
Mr. Twist,
Yes.
Mrs. Snee,
Yes.
Mr. Sievert.
Yes.
Motion is approved.
Continue.
Thank you. Mayor Oda has requested council concurrence of the reappointment of Shirley Snyder to the Economic Development Revolving Loan Fund Loan Review Committee. This committee provides recommendations to council on loans applied for through the Economic Development Revolving Loan Fund. I move that council concurs with the reappointment of Shirley Snyder to the Economic Development Revolving Loan Fund Loan Review Committee for a 4-year term commencing January 1st, 2025.
Second.
Moved by Mrs. Snee, second by Mrs. Westfall. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mrs. Westfall,
Yes.
Mr. Whidden,
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall,
Yes.
Mr. Twist,
Yes.
Mrs. Snee,
Yes.
Mr. Sievert,
Yes.
Mr. Schilling,
Yes.
Mr. Pierce.
Yes.
Motion is approved.
Thank you. We've come to the citizens' comments part of our meeting up front. Anybody wishing to come up and address anything that's on our agenda tonight, come to the podium, give your name and address. You'll have 2 minutes, and Mr. Kerper will keep track of the time.
Good evening, Mr. Rizzo, members of council. My name is Bradley Barron. Reside at 105 Crestwood Drive. I would like to extend my personal thank you to the Community and Economic Development Committee for having the courage to buck the system, as it were, as regards to the marijuana issue. I know it was a tough discussion. I was at one of the meetings where it took about an hour, I think, when you were discussing that. And I thank you for the courageous step you took. We have to admit one thing throughout all of this, and that is this. The war on drugs was lost years ago. Marijuana, as it stands, is here to stay. People are going to smoke it, whether they get it legally or illegally. And we're probably going to hear some people back here that are going to say, oh, that's not true, and, you know, it's more potent. Of course it's more potent, but that's probably because it's being cut with fentanyl and a lot of other dangerous drugs that we need to get off our streets, but we failed in doing that. So I applaud the Community Economic Development Committee for at least taking the courage to bring this to council and pretty much telling the Planning Commission we don't agree with you. Because if you ban it, as I've always said, that which you ban becomes more desirable. So I thank you for the courage to do what you've done. And to the people that want to say, oh, it's so bad, if it was so bad, why didn't you campaign to defeat Issue 1 in the city of Troy? It passed 52 to 48%, as I've said at previous meetings. The time to speak out against it would have been then. As far as I'm concerned, the barn door has closed. You've lost that opportunity to be against it. So let's get it done, guys. Thank you.
Hi, members of the council. I'm Susan Justice, a Troy citizen. I'm a retired RN, a mom, and a grandma. I respectfully ask that you oppose any effort to amend the zoning code of Troy to permit the sale of marijuana in Troy, Ohio. Promoting a marijuana dispensary in Troy, to me, equates to the selling of the soul of Troy for profit. A motive of profit is short-sighted and shallow versus enforcing deep-rooted protections for the long-range welfare of our citizens and our community. By opening a dispensary, you essentially are promoting the dispensing of not only marijuana, but also all the harms associated with it. Opening a dispensary in Troy essentially creates a complicity in dispensing addiction at a rate of 1 out of 10 adults who try it, 1 out of 6 minors. The lowering of brain power and permanent reduction of IQ up to 8 points that can never be regained even after stopping marijuana. Impairment of memory, concentration, and problem solving. Lowered educational performance and outcomes. The harming of babies in the wombs of users. You would be complicit in increasing the driving dangers in our community. The aforementioned ills are well researched and sourced from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Opening a dispensary would not only open a doorway of harm, but it would also tarnish Troy's reputation as a family-friendly town, thus reducing the likelihood of those seeking that culture to move to our beautiful community. I trust that you, our elected council members, the elected gatekeepers of our beautiful Troy, will guard the long-range well-being of our community, citizens, and families. Therefore, I respectfully ask that you oppose any effort to amend the zoning constitution of Troy to permit the sale of marijuana in Troy, Ohio. We are the county seat. We are an example. Let's do it right for our community, for the welfare of our families. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Steve Norris, 2618 Durham Street. I'm a proud resident of the city of Troy. I've lived here for almost 6 years. I love the culture and feel of the city. I'm a public safety professional. I've spent 24 years of my career as a police officer, another 14 as a firefighter and an EMT, served as a chaplain as well as part of a local crisis intervention team. Very few people smell marijuana and they think, wow, that's a group of highly intelligent, well-educated citizens. We know it's the opposite. Right or wrong, recreational marijuana use is associated with crime, poverty, and other much more damaging and dangerous illicit drugs. In my experience, Many hard drug users admit that they started with marijuana, which, when it became tolerated, led to the use of stronger drugs. This is not about the myriad dangers or problems associated with the actual use of marijuana, which are well documented. This is about approving businesses that are associated with a substance that is still federally outlawed. Marijuana is a Schedule I drug, meaning that the drug has a high potential for abuse, and even under medical supervision has an as-yet-to-be-determined medical safety record. The recent legalization of recreational marijuana has resulted in an explosion of underage use, which would only be exacerbated by easier access in the form of a local dispensary. We can look at other states for examples of what to expect should we allow a dispensary to operate in Troy. California has long had a liberal policy on most societal matters, and the following issues have been noted. An increase in crime. The businesses have been violently targeted for their money and their drugs. Loitering, increased traffic in and around the business. In 7 different cities, police report that the medical marijuana dispensary operators possessed and sold illegal weapons and other drugs at their dispensaries. Dispensary operators in several other cities have also been involved in organized crime and money laundering activities. There is a direct correlation between the establishment of these new facilities and the abandonment of adjoining properties due to some of the aforementioned problems, as well as the inability to abate the smell of the marijuana. The question is not whether the city of Troy can allow for marijuana facilities. The question is should. I strongly encourage the Troy City Council to uphold the voters' values and not take the first step down the slippery slope of moral compromise.
Time.
Thank you. Anyone else on anything else we have on the agenda? All right.
Mr. President, looks like there's someone else.
Okay. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Virginia Wells. I live at 2884 Wooden Lane in Troy, and I also am speaking regarding the dispensaries. I made a point paper for the city council members, which I'd like to distribute now. I apologize if there's insufficient copies. I believe I planned on 10. So these are for city council members, as I've already stated. I am also in opposition of the dispensaries. I have many questions regarding them. Among them, will this truly help or hinder our citizens? With the dispensaries, will there be extraneous funds that have to be used to sustain our city? And I mean funds allocated to the police, to an overcrowded jail, to MCRC, to mental health issues. So I have more questions than answers. I've also done some research regarding Colorado and the impact of dispensaries there. All of it points to an increase in crime and an increase in almost like a lack of motivation of the people involved, and definitely mental health issues as well. I also find it significant and noteworthy. The judges in the city of Troy do not want those on probation to have any medical marijuana. I do not know the reasoning there, but I feel that that is very, very noteworthy. Thus, if a dispensary was started in Troy, you have men and women on probation who are attending MCRC meetings, AA meetings, NA meetings, trying to get sober, trying to get in recovery, and then right in their face is a dispensary. I would be interested to know why the judges will not allow medical marijuana if it's that helpful. Additionally, in talking to some counselors, I'm a retired licensed social worker and a grandma as well. They were all opposed to this. They also saw statistics. They also saw what it had done to people as well. Troy, the Trojan, when I've done some,
Your time's getting close. Can you wrap it up?
Oh yes, I sure can. I have alternative ideas. When you look at Trojans, Troy, it means valor. And there's some wonderful alternative ideas that I have listed here. Kettering has invited Cleveland Clinic to have a facility in their city. Could we not do the same? the Department of Defense funds will more than likely increase with a Republican administration, and there would be the potential for more contractors to come and be in the city of Troy. These are just a few of the ideas that I have listed here. So if we're going to zone, could we zone for something that would really contribute to the community? Thank you so very much.
Mr. Chair, since there weren't enough copies, we'll email it to everybody.
Okay, yeah. Ma'am? If you want the rest of your ideas, if you would turn them in, we'll make sure everybody gets them in that, along with that. It's on there?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
We'll email it to everybody.
Yep.
Okay, thank you so much.
Anyone else? Going once? We'll move on to resolutions. Mrs. Knight, will you please read Resolution R 72, 2024?
Resolution number R 72, 2024. Resolution authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety of the City of Troy, Ohio, to advertise for bids and enter into a contract for water meters for calendar year 2025. Cost not to exceed $1 million, which has been budgeted. First reading.
Move to suspend.
Second.
Motion to suspend by Mr. Twist, second by Mr. Pierce. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mr. Pierce?
Yes.
Mrs. Westfall?
Yes.
Move to adopt.
Second.
Motion to adopt by Mr. Twist, second by Mr. Pierce. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mr. Pierce?
Yes.
Mrs. Westfall?
Yes.
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Resolution is adopted.
Thank you. Will you please read Resolution R 73, 2024?
Resolution number R 73, 2024. Resolution authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety of the City of Troy, Ohio, to advertise for bids and enter into a contract for miscellaneous water meter parts for calendar year 2025. Cost not to exceed $225,400, which is also part of the 2025 budget. First reading.
Move to suspend.
Second.
Motion to suspend by Mr. Twist, second by Mr. Whidden. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mr. Pierce?
Yes.
Mrs. Westfall?
Yes.
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Move to adopt.
Second.
Motion to adopt by Mr. Twist, second by Mr. Whidden. Mrs. Knight, will you please call the roll?
Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mr. Pierce?
Yes.
Mrs. Westfall?
Yes.
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Resolution is adopted.
Mrs. Knight, will you please read Resolution R 74, 2024?
Resolution number R 74, 2024. Resolution authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety to advertise for bids and enter into a contract for 2 roofing maintenance projects, one for City Hall, one for the Central Maintenance and Central Service and Maintenance Facility. The City Hall project is not to exceed the cost of $125,000, and that for the maintenance facility not to exceed $180,000. First reading.
Move to suspend the rules?
Second.
Motion to suspend by Mr. Whidden, second by Mr. Twist. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mr. Pierce?
Yes.
Mrs. Westfall?
Yes.
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Move to adopt.
Second.
Motion to adopt by Mr. Twist, second by Mr. Pierce. Mrs. Knight, could you please call the roll?
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mr. Pierce?
Yes.
Mrs. Westfall?
Yes.
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mrs. Snead?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Resolution is adopted.
Mrs. Knight, will you please read Resolution R 75, 2024?
Resolution number R 75, 2024. Resolution authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety of the City of Troy, Ohio, to enter into the Castown Water Line Extension Project Funding Agreement with the Board of Miami County Commissioners and to make payment directly to the project contractor selected by the Board of Miami County Commissioners. The city's share of the project cost is not to exceed $1.5 million. First reading.
Move to suspend.
Second.
Motion to suspend by Mr. Twist, second by Mr. Whidden. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Pierce?
Yes.
Mrs. Westfall?
Yes.
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mrs. Snead?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Move to adopt.
Second.
Motion to adopt by Mr. Sievert, second by Mrs. Snead. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mrs. Westfall?
Yes.
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mrs. Snead?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mr. Pierce?
Yes.
Resolution is adopted.
Thank you. Moving on to ordinances. Mrs. Knight, could you read Ordinance O 58, 2024, please?
Ordinance number O 58, 2024. Ordinance amending ordinance number O 53, 2023, as amended by ordinance number O 36, 2024, appropriating funds necessary for the various departments and offices of the City of Troy, Ohio for the year 2024. This is the year-end annual and routine reappropriation ordinance. First reading.
Move to suspend.
Second.
Motion to suspend by Mr. Twist, second by Mr. Pierce. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mrs. Snead?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mr. Pierce?
Yes.
Mrs. Westfall?
Yes.
Move to adopt.
Second.
Motion to adopt by Mr. Twist, second by Mr. Sievert. Mrs. Knight, will you please call the roll?
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mrs. Snead?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mr. Pierce?
Yes.
Mrs. Westfall?
Yes.
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Ordinance is adopted.
Thank you. Mrs. Knight, could you please read Ordinance O 59, 2024?
Ordinance number O 59, 2024, an ordinance amending sections 1143.16 and 1149.14 of the zoning code of the City of Troy, Ohio, and enacting section 1149.15 of the zoning code of the City of Troy, Ohio. This would amend the zoning code for one marijuana dispensary in B4 district. First reading.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to make a motion as chairman of the committee, Economic Development Committee, that we move this to a second reading. The reason for that is that the legislation proposed did not accurately reflect the directions of the committee, and so what we are going to do on that, we are requesting a meeting of the whole to be scheduled on Wednesday at 6 o'clock.
Mr. Chair, we don't need a motion. It was just a request.
Yeah.
It's a request.
Request granted.
Yes, request. Thank you.
Mrs. Knight, would you please read Ordinance O 60, 2024?
Ordinance number O 60, 2024, an ordinance amending section 1143.16 of the zoning code of the City of Troy, Ohio, and enacting sections 1149.16 and 1149.17 of the zoning code of the City of Troy, Ohio. This would amend the zoning code to have one adult use cannabis dispensary in the B4 district. First reading.
And Mr. President, again, I would, as chairman of the Community and Economic Development Committee, I'd request that this be moved to a second reading, and again, for the same reason that the legislation does not accurately reflect the direction of the committee.
Granted. Mrs. Knight, could you read ordinance O61, 2024?
Ordinance number O61, 2024, an ordinance amending section 1143.19 of the zoning code of the city of Troy, Ohio. This would establish laboratories for cannabis operation in M3 district. First reading.
Move to suspend.
Second.
Move to suspend by Mr. Schilling, second by Mrs. Snee. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Twist,
Yes.
Mrs. Snee,
Yes.
Mr. Sievert,
Yes.
Mr. Schilling,
Yes.
Mr. Pierce,
Yes.
Mrs. Westfall,
Yes.
Mr. Whidden,
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall.
Yes.
Move to adopt.
Second.
Motion to adopt by Mr. Whidden, seconded by Mr. Schilling. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mrs. Snee,
Yes.
Mr. Sievert,
Yes.
Mr. Schilling,
Yes.
Mr. Pierce,
Yes.
Mrs. Westfall,
Yes.
Mr. Whidden,
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall,
Yes.
Mr. Twist.
No.
Ordinance is adopted.
Is there any communications this week, Mrs. Knight, or
No, sir.
announcements? Mr. Titterton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Several announcements. First of all, the mayor apologizes she couldn't be here. She's recovering from knee surgery, but allegedly she is watching, so everybody can smile and wave. We are having the final round of leaf pickup through January 17th, weather permitting. We are closed for the holidays on the 24th, 25th, and the 1st. The 25th and the 1st are the 2 days of the year, or the season, I guess, where we will have a delay in refuse and recycling. It will be on schedule for Christmas Eve. Speaking of Christmas, the Christmas trees, real ones only, please, with no decorations, can be put out, and we will recycle those between the 26th and through the end of January. And other than to say happy holidays, that's all I have.
Thank you. Your leaf pickup hit Westbrook today, so that was much appreciated. Auditor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have nothing at this time.
Law Director, Mr. Kerber.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to mention, Mr. Schilling indicated that it was his opinion that the legislation was inaccurate, and I would invite everyone to look at the committee report, and the committee report clearly indicated that it was set up to be or, and that is how the legislation was presented. If obviously, if there's further discussion at a committee of a whole, if there's the majority of council wants to phrase this in a different manner, they certainly have that choice to amend the legislation. So I just wanted to put that out for the record.
Thank you for the clarification. Mr. Twist.
Nothing this evening.
Mr. Pierce.
Nothing at this time.
Mr. Whidden.
I wanted to commend the city on two actions. One, to swiftly get a new Christmas tree in place after it fell over. It's been our first meeting since that happened. And to also commend the city on their generous donation to the Overfield Tavern after their tragic fire a couple weekends ago, it was now. Thank you.
Mrs. Marshall.
I would just like to wish everybody a happy holiday season and be safe.
Mr. Schilling.
Okay, I'd like to respond to Mr. Kerber. As I say, the way it was wrong was the committee report was not accurate, did not accurately reflect the wishes of the committee. There was not an or. If you go back and look at the video of the meeting, especially the directions that we gave at the end, we specifically said that we wanted to have one dispensary that has the ability to offer recreational and medical, not or. And your legislation, the report, we didn't pick it up evidently when we read it, but your legislation reflects that, or it's not your fault that it did. But as I say again, the committee, when you look at the video, the instructions were very clear that it was to be an and, not an or, and therefore the legislation doesn't reflect that. And so that's what we're going to be talking about. And again, I want to thank everybody who came tonight to listen and participate in these continued discussions. We do listen, and you know, we can welcome you back on Wednesday. It's 6 o'clock here in the council chambers, and hopefully we are going to take a look at the legislation and make sure it's accurately reflects what the majority of council wants to do. And then I'd also like to thank the city for stepping up for the Overfield Tavern. The $75,000 was a great start. I can't speak for the council in whole, but I would like to think that should the Overfield Tavern governing board need additional help, whether bringing in experts or whatever they need to get the tavern back up and running as a museum or whatever future use they feel be suitable. I as a council person is ready to help them in any way that I can through legislation or whatever else they need. It is a cornerstone of one of our cornerstones of our city, and we have to do, I think, everything in our power to get this thing fixed. Thank you.
Mrs. Westphal.
I just wanted to say thank you to the people that had comments. I do appreciate the input about the cannabis subject, and I wanted to wish everybody a Merry Christmas.
This is Snee.
I just want to add my thanks to the staff and volunteers of the Overfield Tavern for continuing ahead with your dinners on such a, I'm sure, trying and difficult day. It was wonderful and amazing to be there. Thank St. Patrick's Soup Kitchen for stepping up to offer that location. It was just as enjoyable and nice as it usually is, and we look forward to celebrating again in the tavern, but thank you for all your work.
Mr. Siebert.
Thank you. Right before council, someone texted me a screenshot of the Troy tree on the Weather Channel, right beside the New York City tree and the Detroit tree. So Troy got a nice national shout out for that. I would also echo the sentiments about Overfield Tavern. I have a little bit of personal history. My grandfather actually lived in that house when it was a house in the 40s. And I attended nursery school there. And my mother has been a long proponent of local history and serves on those boards. And they were all devastated by that loss, I know. And I am proud to be part of a city that stepped up to help fix that. So I wish everyone else a Merry Christmas as well. I wish Eric Kreitz a happy birthday, who is here in the attending today's meeting instead of out enjoying his night. So Merry Christmas to former fireman Eric Kreitz, and best wishes for a Happy New Year. We'll see you all next year.
Thank you. Since we're on our cannabis stuff, the meeting Wednesday at 6 o'clock, as stated numerous times already, the only things that will be covered are Ordinance 059-2024 and 060-2024. Other than that, ditto to what the comments for the Overfield, the birthday wishes, your desire to come and listen to this and participate is great. If you want to participate more, it is your time now. And you may come up to the podium and talk about your comments.
First off, thank you. No, I was just coming in. I know we had talked about the Trex permit. We've kind of moved on. Janelle sold the dance studio, and we are now leasing out front and back of the building. But Blake and his wife are a great couple, and they're going to bring some value to downtown. He's putting a huge investment in the building for some entertainment for downtown, for something to do. So it'll be a great addition for downtown. But thank you for the support on that, and we look forward to working with everybody. So thank you.
Thank you.
Chris Manning, 6 Lafayette Street, Casstown, Executive Director of the Overfield Tavern Museum, 201 East Water Street, Troy. I am here this evening to give an update on the Overfield Tavern Museum and the fire that occurred in the early morning hours of Saturday, December 7th. First, I want to thank the Troy Fire Department as well as the first responders from Piqua, Tip City, Casstown, and Elizabeth Township that responded to the fire and fought to extinguish the flames. I also want to thank Mayor Oda and Director of Public Service and Safety Patrick Titterington for their quick response to the situation and the city's authorization of $75,000 in support to help with the rebuilding process. The museum had insurance on the building, its contents, and for lost income, but we do anticipate the need for community support to bring back the museum. I also want to recognize our amazing volunteers. As the building was still burning, we had to make a decision about the Yuletide dinners scheduled for later that day, and Dick Steineman and Deb Grant of the St. Patrick's Soup Kitchen offered their use of their facility without hesitation. Our volunteers began showing up as early as 6 a.m. With their invaluable assistance, we were able to pivot quickly and still hold the dinners that night. The Yuletide dinners are the museum's biggest fundraiser of the year, and the income from that event is essential to covering our operating expenses. This past Saturday, December 14th, volunteers, under the direction and guidance of museum board members and staff, were also able to access the interior of the building and salvage many artifacts. These were moved to a temporary location at 9 East Main Street, formerly Sweeney Todd's. Dan Burns of Countryside Construction is letting us use this storefront for 3 months free of charge, and the space has already been invaluable in the recovery process. I also want to thank Councilman Todd Sievert for making that connection for us. It will help us greatly as we work to get back on our feet. The museum's Board of Trustees met on Tuesday, December 10th, and pledged to rebuild. It is our intention to preserve as much of the original 1803 Overfield log home and the 1808 log tavern as possible, and to come back stronger than ever. It appears that the log walls of both structures largely survived the fire. We will be working with a structural engineer to shore up the walls as soon as next week. The later additions to the museum building, some constructed in the 1860s and some in the 1990s, are largely a loss and will be removed. Today, we also met with the Troy Foundation about setting up an account for donations, and we will share that information as soon as it is available. In the meantime, we encourage those wishing to support the museum to become members by visiting overfieldtavernmuseum.com. We do not yet know the official cause of the fire, but we do know that the investigation is focused on the utility room, where we had a gas boiler furnace and an electrical breaker box. Arson is not suspected. We will update our website as new information becomes available, but for the most up-to-date information, please visit our Facebook page, where we've been posting regularly to keep the public informed. The support from the community has been encouraging and uplifting in this difficult time. The Overfield Tavern was where the community of Troy was born more than 200 years ago, and we intend to honor that legacy in a historically accurate and educational way, restoring the building to a close approximation of its original appearance and refurnishing it with as many period-correct pieces with local provenance as possible, while also using this tragedy as an opportunity to make updates to the museum. We will be back, better than ever, and thank everyone for their ongoing support.
Thank you.
If you have any questions.
Thank you.
Any questions about anything?
Thank you.
Anyone else on any other topic or that topic?
Council members, my name is Steve Justice. I'm a Troy resident, and my law practice is located here in downtown Troy. I sent an email earlier today to certain members of City Council addressing the proposed amendments to allow for the sale of cannabis either in a medical dispensary or in a recreational use format. And I wanted to follow up and just share a couple of thoughts with you on the record, because I think it's important that you be aware of these issues. I previously spoke before council on this topic, and I highlighted some of the medical and the sociological issues associated with cannabis use. I'm told that some on council may think that allowing recreational marijuana dispensary in Troy will reduce the unlawful sales of marijuana. I do not think that is a correct conclusion at all. As an attorney, I regularly represent defendants who are charged with controlled substance violations, including marijuana, in federal court. People who want to smoke marijuana are going to buy it for the lowest price possible. If persons who are selling marijuana illegally are simply going to lower their prices below the price for which someone can buy it legally, and they will continue to sell it illegally. I'm certain that some persons who would never have bought marijuana illegally are going to try it if it's sold legally at a dispensary. But the people who use marijuana regularly are not going to buy it for a higher price. People who are using it illegally are going to try to buy it for the lowest price that they can, and whether it's sold legally or not. As a result, the bottom line is, I think you're going to have more people who are using marijuana. Those who've never tried to use it in the past who are going to buy it legally, if they can, at dispensaries, and those who have been using it illegally are going to continue to buy it illegally at the lowest price. So instead of reducing the number of persons who are using marijuana illegally, I think it will likely increase the total number and increase the illegal use of it. The bottom line is it's still a federal crime to possess and to distribute marijuana, and I don't think we should be encouraging a dispensary in our city that will ultimately lead to more addiction, more broken lives, and more broken families. The question that I ask you is, what's the real purpose? As you think about this, what is the real purpose for doing this? Is it for tax revenue? That's what I'm hearing. And I think that, too, is a short-sighted purpose and conclusion. I'm certain that if you add up the net community cost to deal with marijuana addiction, it will far exceed any realistic revenue that Troy might receive from the sale of marijuana from a local dispensary. The treatment expenses for marijuana addiction are considerable. The lost employment and income resulting from more marijuana addiction will lead to more persons relying on public assistance, which will eat up more tax dollars that will be generated from the sales. There will be communal consequences that will use more public monies. The opioid cases, over 3,000 of them that were filed in a multi-district litigation proceeding in the Northern District of Ohio, were a candid example, the largest single class action in the history of this country, were a candid example of the community costs associated with drug addiction. And I don't think we need to repeat that cycle. Troy, Miami County, the communities in this area were among those across the country that suffered consequential losses, real monetary losses, by virtue of the fentanyl and the opioid crisis. And here we are, we're suggesting we're going to open up a dispensary and allow that to be through zoning, allow that to be placed out on our highway district for people to see as they drive up and down I-75 into Troy. I think it's short-sighted. It will end up costing us, the community, more money in the long term than we will ever make from the revenue from the sale of cannabis. I also ask that you consider the type of message that you want the city of Troy to communicate to its citizens and to persons who are looking for a place to work and to live and to raise their families. I mean, do we seriously think that parents are encouraged to move to Troy to work, to live, and to raise their kids here when Troy is selling recreational marijuana? I think the exact opposite is the case. I think more people would be attracted to work and to live in Troy, which generates far more revenue for Troy, if they know that Troy is not the type of community that will permit the sale of recreational marijuana just to make money. I remember when my wife and I moved to the community of Troy back in 2003 with our 2 young children. Troy was in the midst of a battle at that time to shut down a strip club that was operating in the same location out there on the highway at the intersection of I-75 and State Route 41. Now that establishment ultimately was shut down through the enforcement efforts of Troy. And my wife and I were attracted to Troy, and we were proud to live in a community that stood for solid family values. Opening a marijuana dispensary in Troy is absolutely inconsistent with that message. It is not pro-family. Allowing the sale of marijuana in Troy would be a public stamp of approval on conduct that clearly is not healthy for persons. There's no dispute about that. It communicates the wrong message to minors. It will encourage substance abuse, not help it. It also flies directly in the face of Troy's multi-year effort to fight and treat substance abuse through the Miami County Drug-Free Task Force, which was a multi-pronged cooperative effort between the Health Department, the Troy Fire Department, and the Troy Police Department to help people break addictive patterns in their lives and return as functioning, productive citizens. Why, after all of that work and all of that effort to communicate the importance of caring for such people and helping them restore their lives, are we going to send exactly the false message by opening a recreational use or even a medical dispensary for cannabis in Troy? That makes no sense. It communicates exactly the wrong message. It will not attract the type of people that we really think form the foundation of this community. Families with their children who care about family values. I'm not sure of what the discrepancy was with respect to the amendments. But it seems to me clear that 2 people on the subcommittee, the Economic and Community Development Committee, have supported taking a position that is absolutely inconsistent with what the Planning Commission recommended. Mr. Schilling, who represents me in my district, and Ms. Snee were the 2 persons who voted in favor of going against the Planning Commission. And Mr. Pierce voted against it. He voted to stay with the Planning Commission approval. I ask both of you, all of you, but particularly Mr. Schilling and those who are at-large members, to hear what I'm telling you, because I believe I not only speak for myself and my wife, but for many of the hard-working, Troy-loving residents in this community. I really do. This issue means more than just the issue. We are communicating something to our entire community about the culture of our community, and whether we're just going to jump on the bandwagon that is ever devolving to a lower common denominator, or are we going to say no? We don't stand for that here. You can go live elsewhere. You can go be a part of other communities if you want that, but we don't do that here because that's not what we're about. We care more about our families. We care more about our kids. We care about more about the people who are struggling and broken as a result of this, and we'll open our doors to treat them. So I ask that you think about what I'm saying, and I ask that you pray about it. And I pray that God will guide you as you make your decision on this very, very important issue. Thank you.
I have a question. Hey, Steve.
Whoa.
Steve. Mr. Justice.
Mr. Justice.
Steve, can you disseminate your email to all members of council?
Sure. I've
Okay.
got it right here. You can print it. And
Just give it to Miss Knight and she'll disseminate it to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You should have.
Mr. Barringer?
I'm going to respond to some of this. Because Bradley Barringer,
Name and
105.
address.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Titterington. Wow. I think these people are in the minority, because let me remind them through you, Mr. Rozell. 52 to 48% is what Issue 1 passed in the city of Troy. And to the chaplain that said, respect the will of the voters, I think they are trying to thwart the will of the voters. If they were so against this, why weren't they campaigning against issue 1 when it was up for a vote? As I said before, I'll say it again. They have lost their opportunity. And this Miami County Drug-Free Task Force, I have to ask, has it been successful? Has it really been successful? Show me the data that proves it has been successful. Don't pontificate, because you don't speak for me. You don't speak for the 52% of the citizens of Troy that wanted this. Okay? I'm going to say this. It is a tough decision. And if this needs to go to the voters, so be it. But let's not forget, the people of Troy voted for it, not against it. So these people that say, oh, it's so bad, show us your data. And I'm throwing the gauntlet down. Show me your data. Because if you can't show me the data, then what you say doesn't amount to a hill of beans as far as I'm concerned. Don't pontificate, don't moralize to me, because I'm not going to accept it. Thank you.
One question, Mr. Kerber. In response. Yes, it was approved in the city of Troy, but what was approved in the city of Troy was their choice to legalize marijuana in the state of Ohio, correct?
Well, it was, first off, to make it clear, it wasn't just a Troy vote. It was a statewide vote. The other thing, as part of, it was an entire new chapter of the Ohio Revised Code, Section 3780, and what the voters approved statewide was all of the different sections of that chapter, which included a provision that said that local political subdivisions could make the choice whether or not they wanted marijuana operators, whether it be cultivators, processors, dispensary. The state law allows it up to the city of Troy to make that decision. And that was part of what was voted upon.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Just for the record, it was state issue 2, not state issue 1.
I misspoke.
I didn't use the number.
There was a big difference between those two issues. So,
Yeah.
Sorry.
Anyone else? That being said, have a wonderful holiday. Merry Christmas. We will see you if you choose to come at 6 o'clock on Wednesday, or we will see you in January. Thank you.